Spanish bits,
Oh, okay.
and I mean he would tell these bit makers, let's change this and let's do that. And, um, Arnold Rojas, from what I have read, probably has some of the most from some of the largest collection of the history of vaquero lore that I've ever read. Um,
Yeah.
he has a book about 2 inches thick that you can pick up. I've been looking for
Nice.
mine lately just to remind me some of the old traditions, like watching your shadow when you're training a horse,
Okay.
stuff like that. I think a lot of guys they look down on what they call a shadow watcher, but that was a real deal. You know, that was how you trained horses. You'd get up in the
I
morning and
uh I do that a lot, and I never thought much of it, but I look at my shadow a lot so I can see, like, if I can see my foot come up to touch him in the shoulder, I know that horse can see it too. So that not only can they can see the coming, they can see that spur coming, and if they can see it, then you don't have to, you're not really kicking them. You're just reaching up and tapping, asking them to step, and but that kind of helps me a lot.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah. There's a few other things that he goes over in there that are pretty old tradition, like making sure that the stars are right. You know, the moon is a certain sign to start a cult,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And then he goes over um, where the old Mexicans and Spanish came through into California. And he goes over the Zorro folklore and stuff like that. Um, just a lot of neat things. And he tells stories of all the old buckaroos that he knew, and goes on
Yeah.
and on. A lot of neat stories right there that, you know, it's kind of like history repeats itself kind of thing. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that you can learn a lot about the old horsemanship too. He actually wrote for Western Horseman for a long time, and I think some of the older guys will know that. I've got a few Western Horsemans that have some of his old stories in it.
Yeah.
But
I
you
um
know, it's the kind
I,
of
I love I
go
love
ahead.
listening to those old cowboys, vaqueros. I'm reading Teddy Blue Abbott's "We Pointed 'Em North," just about all the way through there. But and that kind of reinforces my feeling that the cowboy has always been a dying breed since day one. Because even back then in the old vaquero standard, technology was changing. You listen to Teddy Abbott talk and those first cattle drives. He said there was more sore-backed horses by the time they got up to Montana territory that, like, you couldn't believe. And then just a few years later, the saddle quality had increased, by leaps and bounds, and the way they did things had changed, and how he's talking about the point and the swing man and the flank and the drags, when you're moving a cow herd, and and then all of a sudden, you know, you've got railheads everywhere, and you don't have to drive them very far. And then the way they do things changed again. And then when they moved up to Montana, things changed again. And, things have always been changing. They've always said, the Cowboys going out of business. But yet, here we are, still punching cows, still doing a lot of things the old way.
Right.
We do things a lot different than we did back then. But there's some of those things that we just never found a better way to do it because it worked pretty damn good the first time. So why fix it?
Well, you're never going to find a computer that can start a cult. I'm sorry.
No,
It's
no, that I don't
just
think
never going to
I don't
happen.
think that's a possible. But yeah, I
I mean, they
think
can
looking back at
they can
some of
pretend, but
those, yeah, I think looking back at some of those deals, yeah, that the Cowboys been a dying breed since day one, and I think we always will be a dying breed. But I don't think that they'll ever get rid of us. That's one thing's for sure. there's just certain people that they take to it, and I know that I could make quite a little bit more money doing something else, but I wouldn't love it, and I don't mind the low pay and the long hours. I like being a horseback. I like it's there's a certain satisfaction when you see, especially on my end in the feedlot, you see something sick. I mean, just dog shit sick, and you get him out of the pen, cool, easy out of walk, run them through the chute, give them a shot, and you look at them a couple of days later, and they're running and bucking around the pen. And you're like, did a good job on that one, and they're just there's a satisfaction
Yeah.
of doing that, where you're moving them to winter pasture, and everything's starting to slow down. The calm before the storm. There's something satisfying about that. It's kind of like when you're building fence and you look back and you can see straight 4 wire fence, and you're like, that sucked, but boy, it sure looks good now. I did a good job on that one. There's a satisfaction to it, and a lot of those office jobs, I don't
Yeah.
think you get that.
Everybody has their little niche in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in the jewelry industry, there'd be people come in there and they come from a whole different walk of life to work on that jewelry. Some of them, they've been doing it for 40 years, and that was what they were good at, and they just really shined at it. We had one kid, he come in there, he was a mechanic. And I thought, how in the world do you go from being a mechanic to being a jeweler? And then I thought about,
Yeah.
gosh dang, I myself, I went from buckaroo to being a jeweler, and I was just like, I guess I'm kind of like the pot calling the kettle black.
Yeah, yeah. As I say, you came from a big circle outfit to South Carolina working on jewelry.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really last, but I tried.
Yeah,
But the problem with buckarooing is it gets in your blood, it gets in your bones, and even though you're out there freezing your fingers off and freezing your toes,
yeah.
it's fun.
Or
You just absolutely dig it. There's nothing else that you'd rather be doing.
yeah.
You know.
I was talking to. Do you know Darren Little? He's a cowboy songwriter out of Wyoming, and he had the same thing. And he said, at the end of the day, I can't think of anything else I'd rather do. So you just keep at it. The pay sucks. The people aren't much better. The cows try to kill you. The horses don't want you on their back. But I sure love it. I sure love it.
Yeah. Isn't that something?
Oh,
And we'll
it's
just
it's
keep on
fun.
doing it till we get old and crotchety and rickety, and we're just.
Yep.
I was
But
just talking to my amigo here. Go ahead.
yeah, and I say there's just something about it, and but that, like I've said since I started this deal, is it's that way of life that breeds some of the best stories you'll ever hear. But there's always a competition in the cowboy world with the story. It's kind of like we were the fishing story before fishing stories were cool. There's if I roped 800-pound steer, somebody else is gonna rope a 1,200-pound cow, and then the next guy is gonna rope a 3,000-pound bull, which doesn't exist, but that's the story, and they're sticking to it. But there's a
Right.
one-upsmanship in storytelling, but that's what makes them so cool. And but there's a whole lot of truth to it. And while that bull may probably almost certainly didn't weigh 3,000 pounds, he might have been a big bastard and a fighter. It might have seemed like 3,000 pounds at the end of that line, but there's always a grain of truth to all of it. And I just, the way the world is today, everybody's so at each other's throats. I figured we needed Scott Hall, and we'd talk a little horse and cow wrecks, because even in the most non-glamorous parts of our life, there's still some humor to be found. And more often than not, if you see somebody get freight trained, you're gonna go help a guy out. You're gonna help him up, but you're gonna be laughing as you're as you're extending the hand to help him off the ground, and there's always gonna be some smart ass remark that's said as as it's all happening, and but that's how it is. And if you can't handle that, you ain't cut out to punch cows very long.
Right, right. Oh my gosh, it brings to mind a couple of different stories right off the get go. Like one little roping story. We were working over there by Wild Horse, Nevada, and I just jump right in because if I don't say it, I'm gonna forget, you know.
Oh yeah, let's
But anyway, I
just
was working
go
for
for it.
so I was working for Ellison Ranching Company, and you know, Ellison's, they run country all over the place over there in northern Nevada. And they had a place over by Wild Horse that they had picked up from Benny Binion. You know, enough one
Now
draw,
where's Wild
you'd
Horse
have a
at?
bunch of pretty wild horses north of Elko. If you just
Okay,
head straight north like you're going to Oahe,
okay,
yep,
yeah,
right through there.
yeah. That's sure
There's a
enough
little lake up in there.
big buckaroo country up in there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, good country, really good
Yeah.
country. Anyway, so we've been gathering yearlings off this deal for like a good week solid, and it didn't seem to me back then to be that big of a place, but those yearlings would get away from you. A lot of willows going down through the draws, you know, and some of those draws were washed out pretty good. Those critters that hide down there in the willows, and you couldn't find them. You just kept gathering cattle and gathering cattle. And the last few days, um, we had a little heifer that she just kind of escaped us a few times, and finally old Scotty Satterthwaite, he got her roped, and she dove into a draw, and this draw was only about 8-10 feet deep and only probably about 15-20 feet wide. And so when he tried to drag her out of it, well, she'd hit the edge of that draw, you know, because it was pretty steep right through there where that creek went through it. She just couldn't get up over the ledge if you tried to drag her through it.
Yeah.
And I had this bright idea because, you know, those calves would get pretty waspy and they'd want to take you pretty bad. So I thought, as hard as she's running at us, you know, I'll see if Scott's up to this. I'll have him kind of point her in my direction, and I'll try to outrun her up out of that draw.
Yeah.
Out of that wash. And I mean, you can kind of see where this is going.
Oh yeah, there is very little graceful about a cowhand on foot either. I mean, they're like we all figure out we can run a little faster than we thought when something's in your hip pocket, but there's nothing graceful or pretty about it. It's just all knees and elbows everywhere.
Yeah, that's exactly right, man. That's exactly how it was. And I jumped in that little wash with her, and I took off running the other way. And I had told Scott before we started, I said, if she starts to eat my lunch, you know, you need to dally up and shut her down, you know.
Oh yeah.
I don't know at what point he decided to shut her down, but before she shut down, she probably hit me 3 or 4 times and stepped on my spurs at least 3 or 4 times as well. Basically pushed me out of that draw. He didn't take his turns until she was out of the draw, man. Like, you son of a gun.
Well, I had to get her out. I had to make sure she was out.
I had to get her out. Or get her up the other side, you know. What else are you going to do? Because that country was just rough enough. Once you got them on a rope, you had to go and grab a pickup. And we were like, okay, how are we going to get her out of here? We can't get a pickup and trailer in here. So we tied her down, and we went and we got us a couple of logs, and we put them on the flatbed pickup. We rolled her up those logs all I think there was like 6 or 7 of us. We rolled her up them logs into the back of the truck. Sorry, I keep getting the phone tilted way.
Oh, that's. I
Oh,
had
that
one
was
of
good
those
times.
days the other day. Like I was, so we had one of our pin riders quit, and so I've been kind of flying solo, which I don't mind. I kind of, I like people, but I kind of like them from a distance. And when I'm checking cows, I like to, I have one of my earbuds in, and I put something on, I listen, and I just, I'm there with my own thoughts, and I'll take a note here and there to if I think it's something worthwhile to mention in the podcast. But we had a couple loads of big pregnant dairy heifers going out, and I had to I was running a little late because I had to drop my little girl off at school. So and they were shipping Mexican cattle too. So I was clock in and just haul ass, throw a saddle on, get you a couple bites of breakfast, old mare, but we got to go. And so I go. We had two loads going out. I go grab the first load, and I get them up to the chute, and I go back and I'm grabbing the second load, and crossing the feed alley, and there's a little stray out in the alley. So I kicked her in right then, just because we'd been having feed truck issues. One of the trucks, the clutch went out, so he couldn't slow down for those cattle in the alley, and it's a real narrow alley, just wide enough for the one feed truck to go through. And so every time if he had to stop and open a gate for those heifers, that truck would die, and they'd play hell getting it started again. So I kicked her in the alley real quick, and then I go catch up to my big pregnant heifers. Next thing you know, one of them must have sloughed a calf because she was coming back in heat, and here she is, high centered over the top cable of this fence with about four other of those 1,400-pound monsters just raping the shit out of her, And I was like, God.
Oh,
And I'm not on a big horse either. And I was like, this heifer is probably she's probably 1,300 pounds at least. And I was like, son of a bitch, I really don't want to have to yank this this heifer off the fence. Plus, she's going home, so I don't want to scratch her up a whole lot. And luckily, I go in the pen, and I throw my loop, and she ducked her head, but then she must have got just enough momentum, and she went ahead and crawled off the fence. But oh, thank God. But but then it wasn't more than like 20 minutes later. It was about half hour later. I got the trucks loaded, and there's another one, not quite as big, but same way, and she is just high centered deep. Like her back legs ain't even touching the ground, except for if she rocks a little bit, she can barely get her toes to touch. And same thing. I'm on my little yellow mare who weighs about 900 pounds maybe, and I'll throw a throw a loop on her, and get down, fish a front leg through, and it was slide, 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 come tight, and it took about 4 or 5 pulls at her. We finally got her pulled down off the fence, and I was these are the dumbest creatures on planet Earth. I don't know why I deal with them. Everybody says sheep are dumb, but I don't think they've spent a whole lot of time with Holsteins, because they'll give sheep every bit of run for their money.
right.
Oh.
Angus aren't much better either.
No, those
You know,
when you get a Angus a little worked up, whew, they are just cold-blooded killers.
I don't know what it is about that breed. They caught on.
Um,
They, them
yeah,
old
they
boys,
really
they sure
did.
worked to develop that breed.
Yeah.
They got them pretty, and they got all this calving ease, and they went on, but they forgot to breed some brains into them bitches.
That's exactly the same way on them Holsteins. They got them up off the ground, so you didn't have to be hunched over when you're milking them. They got them real docile, but they bred every sort of brain out of them and try. Those old cows have got no try at all. Oh man, yeah, it's it makes you want to pull your hair out some days, but which is hard for a lot of
Right.
these guys. They ain't got any hair to pull out. So those old bald cowboys, they seem like they're a little extra cranky because they don't got any hair to pull on. I think
Oh shit!
I'll probably
Isn't that
catch
the
some hell
truth?
for I'll catch some hell for that, but it's all right. They'll get over it. Yeah, it's I was I've told this story a couple times, I'm sure, but there was this old boy. Hey, he still works with me. He's a loader operator by trade, but I guess he buckarooed on some fairly big outfits over in California. But he's a nice guy, a Portuguese fella, but he is no hand by any means at all. He just not a hand, and tries hard. And we went on this pretty long stretch where we didn't have anything but dairy heifers, and we got a big slug of native cattle. Oh, I think it was 2 years ago, like October, November, and we got a load of, well, I think it was like 2 or 3 loads of some big old Charlet cross steers out of Jordan Valley, and these are, sure enough, desert cattle had chin wattles, ear marks all over, and some of them had two chin wattles, and
Mhm.
they would move. They weren't real snuffy, but you didn't have to ask them very hard to move. And this old boy we'd been processing heifer or dairy heifers, and my buddy Jesse said he grew out his beard so he could pull on that instead of his hair. There you go. But this old boy, he was just running the lead up when we were processing these Jordan Valley steers, and they might have been heifers. I can't remember, but big old Charlet cross, and the guy that was running the tub apparently was not moving fast enough for this fella, which I was running the chute, and I had never called more cattle yet, so things were rocking along pretty good. But this old man decided, the tub was not moving smooth enough, and he said, "Well, you got to crowd him a little bit." And he gets in there in the tub with him, which I do that pretty frequently with Holsteins, but I even on horseback I don't typically get in the tub with a bunch of native cattle on, especially not on foot.
Yeah.
I'll just stay behind the gate. But yeah, old fella, he gets in there, and next thing you know, it just filters up the line of people processing that. Hey, old John is he got mucked out, and I said, of course he did, because this guy's also very accident prone. That guy he could fuck up a wet dream. I swear to God. and so I just said, of course he did. Why was he in the tub? And we get back there, and they'd open the tub gate and let the cattle out before he got just trampled plumb to death. But we get back there, and he's just curled up in the, as much in the fetal position as he could, because he's kind of a crippled up old man, and he's just going, I read some bitch. I read some bitch. I didn't get that red some bitch. and you could tell he hit his head pretty hard. He was kind of lucid, but not really. And we ended up sending somebody up to the shop to get a creeper, and we carried him out of that tub on a mechanic's creeper. Set him in the back seat of a pickup. I think he had a mild concussion, but I mean, no major issues. But like even in the hospital, he kept saying, "I want a piece of that red some bitch."
Wow. Just wow.
we end up
Yep.
we end up docking or notching the horns on him, and I got the tip of it, and I wood burned red some bitch on it, and gave it to him for Christmas.
Oh, that's good stuff right there.
Yeah,
Oh,
it was fun. My regular listeners, they've heard that story several times by now, but I just never gets old. Every time I think of it, it cracks me up. He was just just in the most awkward fetal position you've ever seen in your life, and he's just mattering a wet hen at, at that red sumbitch.
Wow,
Oh.
that's like that Justin Palmer, man. He's always got some kind of wreck that he's telling me about. One day he decided he was going to burn the ditches, and so he's out there burning the weeds off the ditches. And this guy's got to be watched over. I mean, he's had so
Yeah.
many damn wrecks, and I don't know how he lives through them, but he's going along with his weed burner, and he lights a fire on the ditch in one spot. It's kind of burning along. Then he lights the ditch on the other side. It's kind of burning along. He keeps it going down the ditch. Pretty quick, he's got the flames going on both sides of him. I don't know why in the world he wouldn't just start on one end and go to the other, but he started on one end and then went down to the other. And don't ask me how it happened, but the wind picked up and blew this fire from both directions towards him. And so pretty quick, he's caught in between these two great big, I mean, he said those flames had to be 20 to 30 foot high, just crazy. You know how it gets when it's burning. Oh my gosh.
Oh man, yeah.
Absolutely burned alive is beyond me. He said he come out of it unscathed. I was like, man, you're a freaking idiot. Why do you put yourself in that position, you know?
Oh, no
I'm
kidding.
always looking for a way out because too many times,
Yeah.
you know, you get caught
Yeah,
between a
that
rock and a hard place.
I've seen too many of them prairie fires because I hadn't really been around like these big long sustained wildfires because we don't have that much fuel out on the plains. So what fuel we have burns real hot and real quick. Um,
Yeah.
with I think my buddy Clint's place when that fire hit them, that particular fire hit it was like 50,000 acres in 12 hours is what it burned. Uh,
Oh,
and but yeah, yeah, it was a transformer that blew, sparked off, and then it jumped. Then of course it's high plains, so 70-mile-an-hour sustained winds that day, and jumped or a road into some CRP, which is just, I mean, that CRP is just as flammable as any of that overgrown shit in California that's going up. It's just the same type of deal, and poof, yeah, off to the races then. And then when you got 70-mile-an-hour winds naturally, and then then you got the wind that the fire creates too. Whew. Yeah, those old boys worked their ass off trying to get that thing out, and then they got it out the next day, but I think it was 40 something miles of fence Clint had to replace that year. It was that shit spreads in a hurry.
yeah. Yeah. Over in the Arco, Idaho area where I was running a little place over there. We'd gotten all of our cattle out of it, but about 40 head of dry cows and a couple of 3 head of bulls. And I had them all right there close to the house because I was getting ready to ship them out. Somebody tossed a cigarette out the window, and pretty quick, it's going. And we had
Mm-hmm.
juniper trees down in this one. It was kind of a south pasture on the place. And from where I lived, I could see the whole thing going on. I don't think it took that fire 2 hours to go a mile. It was just screaming along with that wind, and every time it would hit one of those junipers, they would explode. I mean, just
Yeah.
like somebody poured gas on them. I mean, flames would roll up in the air, probably 30 foot to 40 foot high in a split second. And you're like, wow.
Oh
And
yeah.
of course,
Yeah, like you
that
said,
was
just straight
fire.
explode.
Yeah, with the wind that was blowing and then the wind created by that fire, it would go 100 feet in just a second or two. And then it hit
Yeah.
another juniper, and you could see it start to catch on fire and then it would explode and send that fire another 100 feet. Like, holy crap! I'm glad we don't got any cattle. And
Yeah,
I
no
mean, it burned up
shit.
at least. Oh shoot! Each one of those pastures was probably, I'm gonna say, about 25,000 acres or so.
Poof.
And it went through three of those pastures that day. And I mean, I was scared to death. I thought for sure it was going to start coming up to where our place was at. We
Yeah,
started loading stuff in the horse trailer, got the horse trailer loaded. And because we had grazed those cattle in close before we shipped them, there wasn't enough fuel for it to hurt anything. And it just kind
that's
of
good.
petered out. The BLM got there and started working on it. Not that they did much good. Shoot, it had already burned 2/3 of the place. 2/3 of the
Well, that's
one area before they got
yeah,
there.
that's typical government job. They'll show up when it's too late.
Oh, it was all right. We uh, we needed an excuse to get out of there anyway, so
Yeah,
we moved on. Yeah, we
yeah.
moved on.
It's wild how that stuff works, man. It just well, you feel how powerless you really are as a human when when Mother Nature takes a hold. You're just like, holy shit. You feel real small
Yeah,
real
that
quick.
wind and snow are just as almost as bad as fire sometimes. That Harry Youngkin, he worked over there at the Rex Ranch for the LDS Church. This is a lot of years ago. He was telling me a story about how he had a bunch of cattle in a pasture and they had a blizzard come up, and he said the winds were just absolutely fierce and the snow was falling really heavy. And he says those cattle would run to one end of the pasture and they kind of piled up on the fence, and the snow started piling on those cattle, and some of them were suffocating and some of them were freezing to death. And he said the cattle behind them, they climbed over the top of those cattle that were on the fence. And he says it made a nice hard drift, and they went over those cattle and went into the next pasture, went to the next fence. And he says the same thing happened again. He says cattle started freezing to death and dying underneath that snow and suffocating, what have you. And he says they went on to the next pasture. He
Mm-hmm.
says this went on for miles, just
Mm.
miles. He says we found cattle 30 miles from where they started at.
Oh yeah.
It's like, holy crap, 30 miles in a storm.
It's
Yeah,
insane.
it's insane.
They had that 3 years ago. There on the high plains, we had a late spring blizzard. It was the year that I moved out here, and my wife and kids were still back in Kansas, and they were out without power for a better part of a week. They were able to. We had a bunch of had plenty of propane, and then I had some firewood to burn, and so they cooked everything there in the fireplace and whatnot. But those old boys, I think it was well into the like pretty well like next calving season before they finally got everything sorted out. But there was just cattle everywhere. Yeah, just
Hmm.
like you said, they just huddle up against that fence line. They'd get snowed in, and they just get to pushing. Next thing you know, they'd either push that fence over, or the snow would pile up enough where they just walk over the top of it, and they just keep going until they got to the next one. And yeah, there was cattle everywhere. And I think that yard I worked at, in one feed alley, they had about 200 and something dead. Just one alley. I don't know how many cattle they lost
Wow.
on that storm, but it was bad. It really puts a perspective on on how volatile of a business running cows is, because
Yeah.
one little storm like that, just one little drop in of snow from Mother Nature, and ooh, you had people lose their entire livelihood on that deal, and boy, it's rough.
Yeah, that's sometimes the calving out cows and what have you. You see some ugly stuff. You'll see a bunch of scours come through, and scours is the strangest thing because some years it just doesn't matter what you doctor with. And then other
Mm-hmm.
places they figured it out and they've got a program that works pretty good. But I was working for a guy over in Buell, Idaho. It's been 4 or 5 years ago now. We had a pretty bad winter. And over in Buell in that country, they don't generally have real heavy snow. As
Yeah.
a matter of fact, that city of Buell had sold all their snow equipment because they just didn't ever have to worry about it for like 20 years. They didn't have much snow.
Mm-hmm.
And the year I decided to calve out for this guy, we just happened to be getting a lot of snow. And it started coming on, and I wasn't too worried about it. I thought this guy that I worked for kind of had his crap in a pile, so I thought that will be all right. Build a little shelter for these heifers to calve them, and we'll be just fine.
Yeah.
Well, we bought this bunch of heifers from over in Bruno, Idaho, and they were bred to a clone bull of a world champion bull.
Oh.
Well, that sounds all well and good. That sounds pretty cool to have a bunch of fancy calves,
Mm-hmm.
Well, these calves would hit the ground and they wouldn't get up. And at
Mm-hmm.
first I thought, well, no big thing, they're heifers. It's awful cold, pretty snowy and blowy. And we were in Buell where there's not a lot on the farm pastures there. There just wasn't a lot of protection for those cattle. So I thought, oh, that's what the problem is, Well, as winter grew on, we were losing an awful lot of calves to those scours, and we didn't have a very good scour program in place. Basically, calf would be born. We'd take him inside, feed him colostrum, and get him warmed up and going and put him back on the cow. And the next thing you know, he'd get the scours, and
Yeah.
it'd snow and then warm up and melt, and then snow and warm up and melt and snow. And so we were trying to keep these calves alive after they were born, and of course scours, which is not uncommon.
Yeah.
The trouble we were running into is we couldn't get these calves to get up off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
They would lay there, and I thought, well, it's got to be the cold. But it became apparent that probably 90% of these calves would not get up off the ground.
Were they little bitty
They just
calves?
lay there. Yeah, even though the cows were heifers were licking them off, they
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't get up.
I
And
bet it was one of
I'm
those
just
great
guessing that it
Cavanese bulls. One of the deals with low birth
probably
weight and
didn't.
calving ease is they calve a little earlier. Their gestation period's not quite as long, and I think a lot because we had that issue too there when I was in the feedlot, and it's the first thing you're like, well, it's the feedlot, they're weak and whatnot, and it's dirty. But I think those calves were just a little undercooked. They weren't they looked fully developed, but they were kind of like little ratty calves, and boy, you really had to baby them, and a lot of them they just like you said they just wouldn't get up and suck, and you'd pump them full of colostrum, and you'd try to, and it's fine if you got 200, 300, 400 head of cows that you're calving, and you get one or two or 10 of those that that you got to work on. Makes your your life tough. But when like every other one, and you're calving 1,200 head, boy, it's a lot of extra work for you. And
Yeah.
yeah, I I like the Cabanese bulls, but well, you got to be careful with some of them because like I said, I think they don't cook long enough, and they don't have much of a chance when it's like that. They just they don't have any energy. They don't. You can give them B12 and colostrum and Karo syrup and whatever, and it just ain't enough. They just don't. You can try every trick in the book and put them in a hot box, and it's rough.
It is. It'll make you work. I
Mm.
probably lost about 20 pounds that winter. I mean, I was in tip top shape after winter was over with.
Yeah.
But this guy I'm working for now, he's kind of got her figured out. He ended up, he decided to start raising longhorns, and
Yeah.
he'd use those for heifer bulls, and he even went as far as to get them all so that everything he's bred up's black. I mean,
Yeah.
they got horns, but they're all a bunch of black longhorn cattle, and it's the coolest thing. Little itty bitty calves, and
I bet those
boy,
some
they
big
push
running
them calves
motherfuckers
out.
when once they get up and get to going. I bet you play hell trying to tag or earmark a calf one if he's got about 10 days on him.
Right? You know, so far as quiet cattle, I've been around a few quiet places, and this is probably some of the most quiet cattle I've been around.
Yeah.
You know, for a guy who's had a big place, he's really worked on disposition and worked on frame size, you know, so that he could run on the desert, grazes year round. You know, pretty dang good operator. I kind of feel bad. I'm blowing out of here directly.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking in a couple of days. I'm moving on, but I'm not moving on for just the typical cowboy excuse. I got family issues going on that need to
Yeah.
be taken care of. So we got to go
Yeah.
take care of stuff at home, you know,
That's
back
one of
to
the
the
thing on
But man, I'll tell
with
you,
with cowboys there most of them don't need much of an excuse to head on out. It's usually like, well, I didn't like how they're doing. Guy pissed me off. I'm heading out.
that gate wasn't hanging just so.
Yeah, I asked him three
These
times
guys, these guys need to
to
learn.
fix that gate. Granted, I asked him 3 times in a 5 minute span, and it didn't happen. But still, he didn't fix that gate. I'm out of here.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
All it
there's.
is guys like to see new country, and they want to see how so
Mhm.
and so does it. And what's it like down in New Mexico in the wintertime, and what's it
Yeah,
like over in California when they're punching cows? And
yeah.
yeah,
It's
I
it
was
sure
that
is
guy.
neat.
I was that guy.
I've done that. I've done that
You know,
quite a few times myself, and luckily only one time I've had to do that with a wife and kids. That makes it a little harder to just up and move when you got a family trailing along behind you. But it's yeah. There's been I've been I guess Montana, Kansas, Colorado, now Nevada. So I've seen a little bit. I haven't, but there's guys that shit. You can't count on 2 hands the number of states they've punched cows in, and I'm not quite that much of a drifter. I've had a little more of roots take place than that. But there's guys that uh, I had James Shoshone on here the other day, and he was talking about the place he's been, or he just left. He'd been there for a year and a half, and that's the most he's ever worked at a place in his life. And boy, do you know James?
I do. I know James. I don't know. Not too many guys that actually buckaroo don't know James Shoshone. Yeah.
That's kind of what I figured. Well, he's got some stories now. I sure liked visiting with him, and
Yeah.
I think he enjoyed the conversation enough. I can get him back on, so that's cool. I just love hearing those stories because there's a lot of those outfits. I've never had the chance to go go out to cow camp, or I've never had a chance to follow a wagon, and I like hearing those, live vicariously through the guys that actually did it. But my style of cowboying has been completely different than a lot of the guys like you out here in these western states. So it's cool hearing those stories. I think the more we can get those stories out there and give the normal public a view of what cowboying actually is, and it's not Marlboro Man, it's not Yellowstone, and it's not all John Wayne shit. It's it's a lot of fucking work most of the time.
Right. I think that's a it's kind of a strange world. You know, you've got some places where it's dedicated to just buckarooing, and this group
Mm-hmm.
of guys, all they got to do is go chase cows. And in the morning, the the boss ropes their horse off the ropes. If they're on a buckaroo outfit, I'm not sure what it's like in Texas and Arizona and places like that. But when I was working for Ellison's and working for the TS, places like that, the boss catches your horse in the morning, and he leads him to you, and you put your halter on him, and a few minutes later you're trotting a big circle, and or maybe you're trailering out somewhere way out in the middle of the desert, and you spend the day moving cows or gathering cattle or branding or
Mm-hmm.
whatever you're doing, and you do that all day, and then you come back home and your day's done. All you did was work cattle or horseback all day. And
Yep.
then there's places where, like where I'm at right now, I might spend the entire day welding,
Yep.
and then I might spend the next day going and moving horses. And then the next day I
Yeah.
spend the whole day working on water troughs. And then the next day welding, you know, and it's
Yeah.
not all it's not all just buckaroo. And I mean, I wish it was. In a perfect
Yeah.
world, yeah, you'd be a horseback every day, but not every place is like that.
No.
Sometimes to get the better pay, you got to say, you know what, I'm going to go and because I want to make a better living for my family,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe, and I've heard this from more than one old cowboy, that they're tired of dealing with all these punk kids, and so they go to work for a smaller place, and
Yep.
that's where they settle down, and they work for a little place that's got between 400 and 800 head of cows, and they're just tickled pink to do whatever they can do.
Mm-hmm.
They still get to get a horseback once in a while, but they know all sorts of things about the cattle industry, and so they're able
Yep.
to help that ranch owner be successful. And no, they're not going to be a horseback every day. And gosh, I remember guys coming along that they never did anything but blow from cow outfit to cow outfit, that all they had to do was be a horseback. And I,
Mm-hmm.
and I had guys make fun of me when I quit the Sunlight Ranch. Uh, One of the cowboys says to me, Scott, you'll wear lace up boots for the rest of your life. You go to that oil field. And I thought to myself, he might be right. But by dang,
Yep.
I'm going to make a good living, and maybe someday I'll own my own cows. And
Yep.
well, consequently, I had an offer to be a cow boss on a place, and it's like, ooh, dang, I'm going after that cow boss position.
Yeah.
So no, I didn't end up being the guy that went to the oil field for the rest of his life. But by dang, I had the opportunity a time or two to be the foreman, to be the cow boss, and to get to run the entire show, except for main management. And I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, this is what it's all about right here. A little bit more stress. Didn't have to saddle up the bucking horses all the time. I got to ride some nice horses. Got
Yeah.
to, of course, you get on both ends of the spectrum, and you start to figure out, well, when I was the boss, I did it this way. And then pretty quick that deal come to an end, whether it's sold or whether the owner went to prison, tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
uh, that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
so, so, not everything's going to last, but you get to another place and you get a crappy cow boss who either doesn't know his stuff or he's just a big jerk to you all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and you blow on to the next place, or maybe you decided to pick a whole other career. You learn little
Mm-hmm.
things over time that make you better.
Yep.
And I think that's what a lot of guys are all about, is as long as they're moving ahead, as long as they're growing, they're pretty content. Now,
Yep.
I have to admit, a time or two, I felt like I quit growing, like things were getting kind of blasé, and I wanted to get better. I wanted to
Yeah.
improve.
You just
And
feel
so
a
I
little
said, you know what?
stale.
I'm moving on. Yep, yep. And I think that's
Yeah,
what
I
a
know
lot
how
of
that
guys
goes.
crave, is they want to get better. They want to learn
Yeah.
new country. They want
Well,
to learn new ways.
we like a challenge. We're very competitive, and and a lot of it is like, well, I can do it best, but a lot of it is just like, hey, if you try this. A lot of that I hear that so many times. Like, just try this, and and I've heard like now I know this makes no sense in the world, but it works. And we had a pen of cattle when I was in Kansas that, for whatever reason, mostly because it was a dumb shit that was in charge of designing these new pens. So we took a finished feedlot with a bunch of smaller, this particular alley. We had a couple pins that were like 150, 200 head pins, and then we had a whole bunch of them that were like just little load lot pins, just 50, 60 head. But we took out all the cross fences and we made like on each side of the feed alley, we made like three or four big pins that we could run. You know, I think they were right at 750 foot of bunk space. So big long
Hmm.
pins, and that's what we were calving our cows in. But they took out all the drover, the cowboy alleys, and we'd pull them through the bunk gates and push them down the feed alley. And
Hmm.
and this one particular pin, we'd set it so you'd go out the south end of the out the south bunk gate, and you'd push them to the end of the feed alley, and we had some gates across there. And then you'd pull the pin, and then you'd push them back the other way to get into the cowboy alley and push them up to the hospital. And for whatever reason, they'd get to the gate and they'd stop and ball up there at the gate. But if you set the gates right there and you made them double back on themselves, they would go out that gate no problem. For whatever reason, that never works with cattle. If you make them double back on themselves, they always, the cattle that are still in the pen or the pasture that you're pulling, they'll just follow on the fence line, but they'll never go out the gate, it seems like. But for whatever
Yeah.
reason, it worked on that particular pin. I don't know how many guys I told them. I said, I know it sounds crazy, but it works. Trust me, it works. And I had my boss. We were trying it like that one time, doubling back on themselves, and we had all but about 10 head out of the pen, and he comes hauling ass down the alley in the pickup, blaring the horn and pushing cattle back south on us. And what do you know? They all come back in the pen on us. What the fuck are you doing? He said, well, that's not going to work. It was working until you pushed them back in the pen. Why? Why did you do that? I've never been so mad at a boss in my life. I'm usually pretty level-headed, and I can explain my case, but it was one of those, like, those, like you have a certain set of cattle or a certain pasture or whatever that you wake up in the morning and it's going to be a fight, just for whatever reason things aren't, you know they don't work right with those particular cattle or that particular outfit, that particular place. It's not going to be an easy job, and so you wake up with a chip on your shoulder in the morning, just knowing it's going to suck. And then you almost have the job done without a hitch, and the boss man pushes them right back on top of you and insists that you try it the other way that conventional wisdom says will work, but it doesn't. For whatever reason, it don't. And I lost my shit. That might have been the beginning of the end at that place for me, but uh, it is what it is. Your son's watching along, so Jesse told you hi.
Oh, cool. Cool. Yeah. He's down in South Carolina right now. He's
Just
been
living it
ever
up
since
in
he
the warm
left.
country, huh?
Well, ever since he left Idaho, he's been wishing he was buckarooing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. He's determined he's gonna grow up to be something. So I
Well,
guess
good.
I guess that's his forte. He's a go getter. He's one of them
Well,
type A personalities.
there you go. I will say, nothing against the ladies of Idaho and Nevada and whatnot. There's just a lot more of them down in South Carolina, and there's a lot of pretty ladies down there in the South. So I don't blame him for
Yeah.
for being in South Carolina.
Yeah, that's one pull that he has. I think her name's Lucy.
A little
So,
Southern Belle, yeah. That's
oh
been
yeah.
the downfall of many a good cowboy, I think, but that's
Oh
all
my
right.
gosh, yes. Yes.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's it's a hell of a life, working a horseback, working cows. It ain't for the weak of heart, but uh it's sure it's a lot of fun. Uh, a lot of days where you just wanna just burn everything in a pile and and go take an office job because you don't have to deal with the bullshit. But and then as soon as you sit down in the cubicle, you're like, fuck, I wish I would have kept my saddle. And
Right.
it's it's yeah, it's just fun. More than anything, it's fun. I look back through history and and you look at some of like the early cowpunchers. Like I think on the Vaquero side, they've got it was built out of the California style ranching and horsemanship. It was more it was built out of necessity, but it was built over several hundred years. The cowpuncher style was like all of a sudden Civil War's over and we've got a booming cattle industry and not really a whole lot of people that knew how to do it. And they learned on the fly in a real big goddamn hurry. It seemed like and that's kind of the main difference between punching and buckaroo is buckaroo. And correct me if I'm wrong, Scott. This is just from my experience. Is not often are you in a big hurry on a buckaroo outfit. Like a lot of those guys would way rather take your time and do it calm, quiet, and if you don't get everything done, well, you find a good stopping spot and you regroup the next day and do it again. And when you get to the puncher style, it's just like, man, it is going to be 105 degrees here in about an hour. Let's get this shit done now. I mean, it's just a go. But looking through history, that's kind of how the Texas cattle industry was started. It's like we got to figure out how to get these cattle back east. Who's got an idea? Let's do it. Let's go. And then you learn on the fly. But it seemed like in the Great Basin and California area, they had a couple hundred years to figure it out. And that from like I said, correct me if I'm wrong, but that seems to be, from my experience, kind of the biggest difference between the puncher and the buckaroo.
You know, I was raised in a family of buckaroos, whether they want to admit it or not. Um,
Yeah.
they were they were those people who were like, well, there's always tomorrow.
Hmm.
There's always tomorrow, you know.
Yeah.
And my dad would say it all the time. Rome wasn't built in a day. Don't
Yeah.
be in a hurry.
Hmm.
And he was maybe a little too laid back, you know. It was
Yeah.
like, man, somebody got a fire under this guy's behind because he's way too chill. And he didn't give a crap what other people thought. I mean, you could not shame him into climbing a horseback. I mean, it was more important for him to go and visit his buddies than it was
Yeah.
to go out and work cattle. I mean, he was just really laid back. And
Hmm.
on the flip side of it, I had my mother who was one of those type A personalities, you know, go, 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 get it done. We got a lot of work to do and we're going to get the gardening done and the cooking done. And
Hmm.
she's going to clean the house and we're going to work cattle. And I mean, 100 different things. Well, she was raised in a whole different family than dad was, you know. With
Yeah.
them, it was like, yeah, so and so over here, they're working cows and I'm going to go give them a hand and I can get mine done later. It's not a big thing. And,
Yeah.
boy, it's just, there was that different personality. But when I went to work for Ellison's, you know, you'd start out at a certain time every day. You could be pretty well assured that you were going to be to work around 7,
Hmm.
and you were usually going to work until 5 to 6 o'clock at night. And I just kind of got used to that. And my cow boss had it figured out how much work he could get done by lunch.
Hmm.
And I never appreciated him for years and years that I worked. I worked for the Spanish ranch for about 3 years. And there were things that I appreciated and things I didn't appreciate. I could go on and on about things I don't appreciate, but what the hell's the point of that?
Yeah.
The thing that I look back, I was like, wow, this guy made sure that we were done in time to go have lunch. We'd
Mm-hmm.
get done eating lunch and we'd go back to work about, we'd have about an hour of time to eat and go chillax for a minute. And then back out we'd go. And we'd
Yep.
go get the rest of the work done. And things were kind of, I don't want to say timed, but you knew that you could get so much work done in a day.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a regular routine that they did year after year.
Yep.
And a lot of people that I worked with, they would cuss that cow boss that I had and say, well,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so and so fired him, blah, blah, blah. And he ain't no hand, and on they'd go. Well, I learned over time that it's not always about being the best horseman. It's not always about being the best cowman. Sometimes
It's
it's
being the
about
best hand.
that's somebody that guy shows up every day,
Mm-hmm.
year round. He doesn't ever call in sick. He doesn't go
Yep.
get drunk at night and show up worthless the next day.
Yep.
You know, this guy has his crap together. And
Yep.
sure, he's not the best horseman in the bunch. Sure, he's not the best man to ride into a herd of cows and sword. But you
Yep.
can count on him. You can count on him showing up day after day after day.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty quick, you realize it's not always just being a good cowboy. Sometimes it's about being a good man.
Yep.
You know, some guys, yeah, they've been around to 20 different cow outfits and they've worked there twice. And
Mm-hmm.
everybody knows him. The guy's practically famous, but his
Yep.
attitude is crap. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to work around him because he never has a good thing to say about anything.
Yeah. I had a
And
guy that worked
you
for
don't,
me, and he was pretty damn handy, but never had a good thing to say about anybody. And after he ran through the list of pretty well everybody that I'm working with and talking about how they don't know anybody, and I punched for I buckarooed for this guy, and I know this guy, and I had Ernie Marsh build me this bit. Got his number and whatnot. He doesn't answer me anymore, but I got his number, and well, like after he's ran down everybody else on the outfit, you're like, what's he saying about me behind my back? And turns out, well, yeah, he was talking a little shit behind my back too. And I just I don't understand people like that, but that's just people, I guess. And after a while, I've kind of coming up through the cowboy world. I always kind of held a grudge at some of those guys that just didn't want to help you at all. And then after about 6, 7 people that I've trained and tried to help out where I can, and then I get to the point where yeah, I'll tell you how I do things and tell you why it works for me, and you know how I do certain things. Like I don't ever, or very rarely, when I pull a calf, I don't take them at a diagonal across the pin. There's just too much ground to cover if they want to cut back. So I drive them to the fence, take them down the fence line, and then you've basically got another cowboy right there in the fence. Like that fence is your friend, and I'll tell people that. And next thing you know, I see them trying to trying to be highbrow cat out there in the middle of the pen, driving this calf diagonal. Just take him to the fence, and your horse ain't gonna have to work near as hard. That calf ain't gonna get near as stirred up. Just bring him down the fence line, and then after you keep watching
yeah,
him do the thing you tell him is gonna be way harder. You keep watching him. Well, I'm just gonna stop giving you advice. If you're not gonna take the advice, I'm not gonna give it. It's not worth my time. So figure it out on your own. And after you have a whole slug of those people, and then you're just I'm at the point where like, fuck, I'd just as soon work longer hours and do it myself because that's the big part about this outfit here is that they pay me good, uh, you know they treat me really well, but the biggest part is they leave me the fuck alone. Just they know that I know what I'm doing and I'm pretty decent at what I do. We may have a few wrecks here and there because that's you're working with cattle and horses. That's going to happen. But by and large, my death percentage is beyond acceptable, and and my cattle they ship out in good health and good shape, and they're pretty quiet. So they just leave me the hell alone and let me do my job, and that's the biggest part. But now we're gonna get busy at some point, and we're gonna need somebody else to help. And I'm just like, God, dang, can we get somebody who knows anything? Just if they can, if I can get somebody who can pick up two back feet every third loop, that would be fucking amazing. You know, just somebody that that has some little bit of know-how. And I have no problem teaching people, but man, when you just get burned so many times, you're like, I don't want to even deal with it. I just don't want to deal with training somebody new. I want somebody that can has already has a some sort of know-how.
Yeah, I think you're going to
But
start seeing less and less and less guys that have any kind of know-how. Uh,
I think so.
we're going into a day and age when a lot of guys that are really out there to do the physical work, they're just uncommon. And I was told this literally like 15 years ago. I was at an engraving seminar, and the guys told me, they said, the people who are willing to do hand work are getting uncommon. They said
Yeah.
it's going to be a rarity to have people who want to weld, people who want to work cattle, people who want to, be carpenters and plumbers. They said
Mm-hmm.
the way of the new world is going to be computers.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, wow, this stuff's going to start to pay decent once we start having a harder time finding people who know and people who want to do. And
Mm-hmm.
finally, now that I'm 45 freaking years old, I can go out and make a living as a cowboy. I can make just as good a money cowboying as I can welding. And
Yep.
who would have ever thought? Yeah, you can't really compare very easily because I get a house to live in. These guys feed my horses. Some
Mm-hmm.
of the places are paying for my shoeing, you know,
Yep.
but I still make a pretty dang good paycheck.
Yep.
Who would have thought, 20 years ago, here I was making a whole 900 a month,
Mm-hmm.
basically starving to make a living. Now I can go out and I can pull in 3,000 a month as a cowboy.
Yep.
And I can pull in even more if I'm willing to go out and weld and put up fence and do the rosin jaw work as well. Sorry, I don't mean to make it sound uh, a lower position to be a rosin jaw.
No, it's just not
Rosin
cowboy.
jaw, right? It's not cowboying, but on the other hand, hey, if I do both, I'm going to make better money than if I'm just a cowboy.
Yeah, exactly.
And
I've told that to the young guys and gals that have worked is like the more you can learn and the more that you have at least a general understanding of, the more valuable you are to that outfit. And it's not a universal truth, but more often than not, if you show that you can do a little mechanic and do a little bit of welding, know how to put up hay or drive a feed truck, the chances are you're going to get an opportunity to do that, and chances are you're going to get paid a little bit more. And like I said, that's not universally true. There's always shitty outfits that the pays what it is, but um, you know, more often than not, the more you can do, the more you're worth, and the more you get paid for.
right, yeah, I always thought for a long time, man, I don't want to be a welder. To hell with being a welder. That's hard work. And
Mm.
sitting underneath a potato machine in rotten potatoes trying to weld up a piece of pipe. Who the hell wants to do this for a living?
I thought
And
the
now,
same thing
a couple
with
years down the road,
feed trucks.
mhm,
Yeah, I don't know
a
how many
couple
times
years
I've.
down the road,
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. This delay gets you sometimes.
I was just gonna say, it's it's only been about maybe 4 years since I was a welder full time,
Yeah.
and all that knowledge that I have, this guy I work for, he sees what I can do, and he's like, man, it's sure nice to have somebody who knows, somebody who understands,
Yeah.
so that we're not just cobbling shit together. We're actually able to repair a piece of equipment instead of just, let's patch it together and let's hope that weld holds,
Yeah,
or
rather than putting a band-aid on it, you're doing reconstructive surgery.
yeah, and all this stuff comes into play,
Mm-hmm.
but it makes a guy a hell of a lot more valuable to you if he's got some skills besides just punching cows. But on the other hand, when it comes to the computer work, you're talking to the wrong guy.
Yeah.
I'm pretty fortunate I have guys like Matt McKinley who can say, Scott, go over here to Zoom and you need to download that app. I'm like, what the hell's Zoom? I'm pretty fortunate that I can even open my phone to answer a phone call,
Well, look at you go now. Now you are broadcast live on the World Wide Web telling cowboy stories.
It's a,
So
it's a scary thing, huh? Well,
it's all good though. People like it. That's one thing I found out is oh, my buddy Sam told me, he's like, well, you kind of found your own market, and that's true. Because I've been a big listener of podcasts for quite a while now, and there's a lot of
mhm.
that. The good thing about podcasts is anybody can do one. It takes a little work and really not even a whole lot of know-how. They've got it set up to where it's pretty damn easy to do. Um, and the quality of my recording early on and even now is not the best at times, but the content is good. And so I thought about what I like to listen to, and I some of my favorite stories I've ever heard have been at a meal after Brandon, or sitting around a campfire, or hanging out behind the rope and shoots or whatever, at somebody's trailer after a rodeo, and it just talking shit, just a bunch of cowhands, telling war stories, and those are my favorite stories on earth. So shit, why not put it in a podcast? And it turns out
Right.
there's a lot of people kind of like me that like that stuff. So it's pretty damn neat. It's been a huge learning curve trying to make it what it is, but people keep tuning back in, so we'll keep doing it. And like I was telling you last night, uh, some of the well, between you and a couple of the bigger name people that I've spoke to, but if I ask who should be back on the show, or who do I need to get on the show, Scott Hall pops up more often than not. So I think you'll always be welcome back. I know we'll bullshit all day long. I like I was telling you yesterday, and when I posted, there's certain people that when you want to talk to them, you just got to clear your schedule, and that's not a knock on you. That's a knock on us both, because we both like to talk, and once we get going, it doesn't stop. So I got to make sure my schedule is clear before I give Scott Hall a holler.
Well, it just so happens, like I said, I took a job with a guy who he is determined that his guys are going to get Sundays off.
Mm-hmm.
And man, he is just super about it. There's
That's
a lot of
awesome.
work to be done, and he wants to get the work done, but he says, you work a guy into the ground day after day pretty quick. He says, you can't get a full day's work out of him in 12 hours. He says, you
No.
can't get 4 hours of work out of him in 12. He says, you've got to give a man a day off.
Mm-hmm.
And so he lives by it. And
Yep.
so I've got a day off today, and I'm just packing up my stuff. I'm kind of getting my engraving outfit put into the camp trailer. I'm moving back up to Idaho, and so I don't have a real pressing day. So I thought, man, this is perfect. We'll visit,
Yeah.
talk about
It's
cowboy
awesome.
steel.
It's always a
Yeah,
good
work.
always a good time. I enjoy the shit out of it, and It'd been too long since we'd caught back up, so it's always good visiting with you. I mean, I enjoy the shit out of it. I know my listeners do too, and it's yeah, there you bring some authenticity to your stories, and then you just you've got a good storytelling voice, and that's a you know there's a
Thanks, Dad.
I've heard a lot of different stories, and there's been a couple people that I think, man, if they just had a little different voice, that'd be a hell of a story, But there's an artwork to everything, whether you're engraving a concho or a bit or a gun. I've seen some of the guns that you've engraved, and it's just I always think, how did you come up with that? But you got an artistic mindset, and uh, but there's the same way with telling a story. I used to catch so much shit in college, especially in college with my some of my city friends, and they're like, "Well, you take 30 minutes to tell a story," but I was like, "Yeah, but you got to tell the backstory, and then you got to venture off over here, so everything when it comes to a conclusion, the punchline or whatever hits that much harder. But there's a you
Right.
got to weave it. It's a tapestry."
That's right. It's a mental painting that you're doing for these people.
Mm-hmm.
You have to see, here I am. The setting is the rockiest peaks that you can imagine with juniper trees, and half of them burned up on one side because there's a forest fire that came through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's
You
those
have to
little
tell this
details
part
that
of it.
matter. Yeah, it
Yeah, I mean,
mattered.
here we go. We're on the driest, dustiest desert that you can imagine, and the only way that the grass grows is becomes somebody pissed in the wind about
Mm-hmm.
3 years ago.
It finally took root.
Yep.
Yeah, it's yeah, there's definitely an art form to it, and I don't know if I've figured it out completely yet, but I've there's just certain stories like if you don't tell this little part about it, and it may take you 10 minutes to get to that point, but then if you don't tell that part, then this part of the main story doesn't make sense. So you gotta wind it all together, and
That's right.
it's just part of it. And uh, but like if you've been out, even if just been out on the desert gathering cattle, or whatever your scenario is, catching a trot in the morning to go pull a pin of fats to ship, whatever the scenario is, there's certain little nuances that make that story unique, and if you don't tell those, then it's just another generic cowboy story that you know it might capture the attention of a city slicker, but somebody who's been out there and done that type of thing, like, well, there's probably more to that story, and you can always tell when you're not telling the full part of the story. A guy will cock his head and like, doesn't sound quite right, And so then you got, well, this is why, and then if you'd have just said that in the first place, it makes more sense. And I don't know. There's, I said, there's an art form to it.
Certainly. There's some situations that a lot of people will never experience. And so I think that you have to remember that not everybody in this world even realizes that there's still people that run wild horses. There's people who work for the government who really were cowboys. They were ranchers. And now they're in the wild horse industry, and they're helping to get that gather going, And somebody has to get those jobs done. And somebody has to have gained the knowledge at some point to do that.
Yep.
And like, for instance, back in the day, there was a rodeo company, and I'm not going to name them, but they had to go out onto the desert. They had turned out a bunch of mares, and this was before it was illegal. I shouldn't say it was illegal, but it wasn't as big of a deal to go out and gather horses. And they had a bunch of bucking horse mares that they turned out, and they had some stud horses that they turned out. And then there was the bunch of horses that was already out there that could put on a rodeo. They needed to go and gather these cranky young horses to put on the rodeo. So they'd go out there and gather them up. Well, for a long time, it wasn't really that big of a deal. But then the BLM guys said, well, wait a minute. You know, those are our wild horses. And they're not supposed to be out there messing with our wild horses.
Yeah.
Well, really what they are is they're feral horses, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it was, the BLM thinks that they're just out there padding their pocketbook when actually these guys turned out good bucking horses to be able to make good bucking horses. Yeah, they took advantage of the situation, but man alive, we're trying to make a living.
Yeah.
You know, it's fun. Yeah, it's exciting. Sometimes wrecks happen, but we're not just all out here screwing off. We're actually making a living.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a little bit more exciting. It takes a little bit more skill. There's going to be times when people get in a wreck and it's a good wreck and it's a fun story. And some guys, I'm not going to name names, but there's some guys that they make wrecks and they create wrecks just because they like a good story.
That's true. I don't know how many
someone.
I don't know how many times I've seen somebody take the tail of their rope and just pop a colt on the ass end just to see the sparks fly, you know. And if that old fella on the colt gets a little burr under his pad, well, guess what? You know, every colt that guy gets on is going to get popped in the ass with the tail of the rope just because that guy got pissed off about it. Instead of just thinking, you know, we're cowboying and just riding it out. Now, they get a little hot under the collar. Well, guess what? They found your button and they're just going to keep pushing it.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Oh,
yeah.
Times.
Oh, man.
Well, Matt, I don't know if I'm burning up more time than we should, but I'm feeling like we need to get going here.
All righty. Well, yeah, I think we covered plenty today. I sure had a good time, Scott. I appreciate the hell out of you. It's good catching up with you. It's Scott Hall, ladies and gentlemen. You know, we've never met in person yet. We will one of these days, and it'll be one for the ages. But I'm proud to say my good friend Scott Hall, buckaroo extraordinaire, silver engraver like you wouldn't believe, and just a damn good guy. I appreciate you coming back on, man.
Well, Matt, I sure appreciate you taking the time and working on this podcast, and you're building something for the ages. Like I said before, there's information here that time kind of forgets. People don't realize what we're trying to do out here, and they don't feel like it's important. They're too worried about politics, and they're worried about, you know, the end of times, and you know, we're just out here trying to feed the people. Yeah, we have a good time doing it, but we're just trying to feed the people, you know.
Yeah, so. Well, and you know, at the end of the day, cows don't give a shit whether you're voting for Trump or Biden or BLM or, you know, Blue Lives Matter. They don't give a fuck. They just want some grass or some hay or some corn, and they just want to not die. And if, you know, a lot of them, if they think they're gonna die, they want to make sure they take you with them. That's what makes it fun.
Oh, I love how you put that. Well, let me go. You have yourself a good day.
Yeah, you too. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Now.